Ladies and gentlemen, good evening and welcome to American Voices, this first installment of our Sounds of Home series. My name is Steve Wenig and I'm the general manager of the Oregon Symphony. You were probably expecting to see our president, Scott Showalter, this evening. I am not him. Scott and his voice are recuperating from an illness at home, and I will be filling in for him for tonight. Before we go any further, we just have to look around at this awesome workspace. Please join me and give me a big round of applause for Wyden and Kennedy and sharing the space with us tonight. Dan and Priscilla Wyden are great friends of the Oregon Symphony, and so is Umpqua Bank, as they are the lead artistic sponsor for our Sounds of Home series. We also have to recognize PNCA. If you remember, this event was originally scheduled for PNCA. That art exhibit, Adversity and Triumph, is still going on, but it's actually going to start next month on the first Thursday's opening on November 2nd. Please take a moment to check that out next month. You've heard us talking about Sounds of Home. You've heard us talking about, if you've been to a symphony event for quite some time. It's three important issues: immigration, environment, and homelessness. And we've also said we are a nonpartisan organization. We don't stand on the left, we don't stand on the right. But let me talk for just a few minutes what we do stand for. We stand for great art. We stand for the power of great music. Music helps us understand ourselves. Great music helps us understand the world around us. Music helps us understand each other even better. And if I was in a church, this is where I would say, can I get an amen to that? So how about a just, yay, Steve? Yeah, our. So we'll go ahead and get started. Tonight, 4 performances, 3 performance partners, and some organizations and artists joining us tonight. We're not experts in immigration, so tonight we have invited Catholic Charities to help us navigate some of the talk. Dr. Rick Burkell is the executive director, a relatively new executive director of 3 years, and he's going to join us for some discussion tonight. Please welcome Dr. Rick Burkell. So, Rick, can you give us a little bit of a backdrop, give us a little bit of a setup on immigration, refugee communities here in Portland and here in Oregon?
Thank you. So first of all, I want to thank you, Steve, for putting this all together. This is great for our community. Thank you. Thank you, Oregon Symphony.
You bet.
You guys are doing a great job.
Thank you, Rick.
You know, if we're going to talk about immigration in Oregon, of course, we have to recognize that indigenous people have lived here for 10,000 years. So anyone who came 9,000 years ago or fewer is an immigrant, kind of by definition, right? But we don't really see a big influx until 1800s, when now Oregon and Portland in particular has a port. There are ships lined up, great agriculture. The trail has come all the way west to Portland and Oregon. And now, as early as 1840s, we see neighborhoods in Portland, Jewish neighborhoods, and we see Irish neighborhoods, 1840s. And then, if you go through to 1920s, but early 1900s, you see whole communities of Mexican immigrants, farm workers, and Japanese immigrants, farm workers, in Portland. So now we're growing into neighborhoods, right? The Japanese neighborhood at the time, what we call today Chinatown. It was Japanese town, right? That's who formed that town and built it out. And then when we get further, we see whole communities being built, right? In larger and larger groups. World War II really changes everything. Because in World War II, after World War II, immigration and refugee resettlement becomes a more formalized national project. The United Nations gets involved. And in Oregon, beginning in the 40s, we're resettling German Jews who are leaving Europe at that time. In the 50s, people from Hungary who are leaving the turmoil in Yugoslavia and Hungary at that time. In the 60s, it's Indonesia and Cuba. And in the 70s, it's Vietnam and Asian communities. And so it goes on and on and on in these waves. And today, lots of immigrants from the Middle East and from Africa. So lots of Somalians coming, lots of Iraqis coming, lots of Afghans coming, Syrians, etc. So that's been the history, and those folks have tended to live in neighborhoods, in groups, and then work from there and grow bigger and bigger over time.
So historically, waves of immigration, it's part of the American story. But the dialogue and the chargedness right now, it feels different. Or is it different? I mean, what's changed or has it changed?
You know, I think Americans have always had a love-hate relationship with immigration. The great paradox of America is that Americans always have distrusted immigrants, and two, most Americans are immigrants. Now figure that out, right? That's been our craziness about this issue. In 1920 in Oregon, there was a form of nationalism on the rise that feels a lot like today. This was the Americanism movement in 1920 in Oregon, where their rallying cry was one flag, one school, one nation, one language.
Wow. Wow.
They were completely against any diversification. On the other side, we see the tradition, the long-term tradition of diversity in this community. And today, 1 in 7 Portlandians have been born in another country. And so recognizing in this community, a community of artists attracts artists. And in fact, we have a vibrant immigration community here that is continual, right? And good thing.
Yeah.
Right?
Rick, thanks for sharing all that. Now let's get to exactly Catholic Charities. You guys have been working tirelessly in this space for quite a long time. Tell us a little bit about the work Catholic Charities does.
Thank you. Yeah, we've been doing this work with lots of community partners since really before World War II, but certainly beginning around that time, particularly. And it's changed over time, but mostly we and our partners, IRCOs, and Lutheran Community Services, SOAR, other groups, often faith-based groups, have resettled people here and been the welcoming community. People need all kinds of help when they come. They need help with finding housing, with enrolling in school, finding a doctor, finding a job. And we do all those things. We do that by connecting people to communities. Often these emerging communities support their own newcomers, right? There may be family relatives here. We connect them to church communities, because church communities have always been welcome to the outsider, to the stranger. And most recently, increasingly, we have to take steps to defend immigrants. And I think that's new. That is what's new. When there's such threats, both legal and moral and frankly, politically, to the immigrant and refugee communities, we find ourselves increasingly defending people. We were developing a deportation defense program. There are 49,000 children in Oregon who have a parent who could be deported. 49,000. There are 12,000 dreamers who thought they were citizens. We see them as American kids, and they might need legal assistance to remain here in the United States. So there's an increasing need to defend immigrants instead of even welcoming them. It's really about, so that has changed. But I think the pendulum will swing. We certainly hope so, right?
So let's tie a little bit to arts and culture. What have you witnessed in immigrant and refugee communities in terms of the arts that they bring with them? How do they interact with the arts that are already here in our region? And ultimately, how does that influence the entire landscape of arts?
Yeah, I think immigrants, have two responsibilities in their own mind. They are keepers of that tradition, of that wonderful tradition from home, right, from where they came. And that's important for a couple reasons. One, because it reminds you of who you are. It gives you great dignity in remembering who you are, because this society may not embrace you in that way. It creates a buffer against hatred and misunderstandings. But at the same time, I think artists that come to the United States as immigrants and as refugees, and there's some evidence that there are a higher proportion of artists who actually make that trip, think about that more immigrants by profession and refugees are artists. So that's an interesting one. But there's this fusion piece, right? I mean, artists come and in their collision with our culture and our society, they create new forms of art. They create remarkable new forms of art, right? It's like lava meeting the ocean. There's steam and light and heat. And I think that's part of the immigrant art experience as well. Those are the two beautiful pieces that we see in communities. And in the communities that treasure those historical traditions and cultures, we see a lot in the churches, in synagogues, in mosques. That's where the culture is often preserved.
Indeed. Rick, thank you so much
My
for joining
pleasure.
us tonight.
Thanks so much.
If you want to, Dr. Rick Burkell. If you'd like to learn a little more about Catholic Charities, Dr. Burkell and his staff will be hanging around for reception after. Please stick around. Now we're going to move to our first performance by Milagro. And I would like, let's see, is Jose Gonzalez here? There he comes. Please join me in welcome the Executive Director of Milagro Theater, Jose Gonzalez.
So you just want thanks a lot. Thank you so much for inviting us to be part of this. We were really quite honored when the Oregon Symphony called us and said, this year we're going to dedicate our season to home. And we said, oh, we did that last year, so we're great. Let's talk about that. Anyway, in case you don't know, Milagro, also known as the Miracle Theater Group, was founded in 1985 by my wife and myself. She's up there in the red. Just two broken down, poor, out of work artists trying to continue to do something that we loved and finding others around us to help realize that dream. We are a Latino arts organization, hence the name Milagro. We consider ourselves the premier arts and culture organization in the Northwest. We're very honored to be here. We are now in our 34th season. I don't know how we did that, but we're still around and kicking. We do programs at our home in the Central East Side Industrial District across the river. And we own our own building, and we have a 121-seat theater and facilities for meetings and offices and studios and workshops. We're really proud. We have this and this benefit, and that's largely due to the generosity and support from a large community who is passionate about the arts. We do programs on our main stage, and a lot of what we do is original, unique, and new theater, and you'll be seeing a little bit of that tonight. We also do plays by Hispanic playwrights from all over the world. We have a touring company that tours the nation, performing original shows on a variety of themes and issues that are important not only to us, but to our entire community. We feel that while we have certain areas of interest, they are shared, and that's part of all of our story, and we want to kind of explore that with other people. We do programs for children, and we do a lot of activities that connect with the community to the arts, because we feel that the arts is important to all of us. It's really what makes our lives meaningful in so many ways, and that the more that we can find that area of expression, the better off we are, both for ourselves and for the community around us. Tonight, we're going to sort of preview a little piece from a new play that we are going to be opening next week as part of our annual Day of the Dead Festival. Dia de Muertos. This will be the 22nd installment of that program. What's unique about this is that every year it's a completely original piece. We don't even know what it's going to look like when we go into rehearsal, but the director and the performers get into the studio and based on a theme or an idea that we may have, generate a new show, which is one of our strongest programs of all. I hope you'll be able to see it. This year, the show is called Éxodo, and Éxodo in English means Exodus. And as part of our theme for season 34, which is rise up, stand up, speak out for who you are and what you care about. Éxodo is going to explore the emigration experience. People who are forced to leave their homes, their countries, their loved ones due to circumstances beyond their control, through war, through natural disasters, through economic hardships. And then we're also going to be looking at the struggles and the sacrifices and the dangers that they encounter in that journey. So obviously we're going to do that in a much more dramatic way, but I hope that you will key into that. I think you had one final question about the immigrant experience, and there's a little different take on it. So a little background on my history. My grandparents were from Mexico, from northern Mexico, Nuevo León, and Laredo. But my parents were South Texans, spoke Spanish in the home, but raised me up, like a lot of their generation, to only speak English, interestingly enough. Because the feeling at that time was that if you spoke Spanish, Spanish was considered to be a dirty language, that you would be repressed in school and dropped behind, which was pretty much the truth. There is that saying later on that the son remembers what the father wants to forget. And that was sort of my experience. One day I realized that I was Latino, but I had been denied my personal heritage because of situations outside of my control. And it was then my quest to recover that lost part of me that I knew would give me more life and give me more meaning. And to a great extent, Milagro exemplifies that effort. It is me and those around us who are trying to find our understanding of ourselves, our place in the world, and the community around us. So, in any case, thank you all for letting us do that. I should get off the stage and let the performers do their job. Thank you.
Get back! You messenger of any god! Have you come here to take away this heart of mine that belongs to the living? I will not let you take away this heart of mine that belongs to the living who move about. My heart is mine in the house of hearts. My heart is mine in the house of hearts. My heart is mine in the house of hearts, and it is unrest there. My mouth shall be given to that I may speak with it. My legs to walk, and my arms to fell the enemy. I should have power in my heart. I should have power. I should have power to do whatever I desire. My soul and my corpse should not be restrained on the portals of the West. When I go in and out, in stone of copper. Prepare a path for me, that I may enter the beautiful west.
Jose, thank you very much for sharing your work with us. You can learn more about Milagro at milagro.org online, and they also have a table right down there in the lobby to learn more about them. Next, we're going to actually segue to a little segment on the symphony. The orchestra is we at the Symphony, we're a collective musical melting pot. We have musicians from over a dozen countries, hailing from 4 different continents. As they're taking the stage, there we go. As they're taking the stage, we've invited music director Carlos Calmar to come up and talk a little bit with us. Carlos, please. Carlos, please talk a little bit about your immigration story, a little bit about Sounds of Home, and also a little bit about what we're about to hear.
Hi, good evening. Such a pleasure to be in this magnificent building. First, I wanted to tell you a little bit about Sounds of Home, this mini-series of 3 concerts that we created around 3 topics. And you might ask yourself, why does a symphony orchestra that actually over the years have established such a great reputation, not only in Portland and the state of Oregon, but even nationwide, why do we even embark on something that no other orchestra in the United States has done? And the origins of that is mainly kind of last year, when we did our Soundside series, and even before the first concert, we saw that we will generate a lot of interest. And then we thought, what can we do after that that has an even greater impact in the community and maybe through the radio with other people? And we came up with this Sounds of Home thing. And for me, I don't actually need to talk about the fact that the symphony is non-partisan, because I can tell you that we actually came up with the 3 themes of homelessness, environment, and immigration way before the time you think we came up with it. And the reason why we did all of that is because I actually always thought that, as unfortunate as this may be, environment, homelessness, immigration, just to name those three, are always going to be problems. No matter what situation we are in any country right now, that doesn't matter. We could have presented something like that 3 years ago, it would have been valid nonetheless. So we did that, and sometimes in my long career as conductor and my very long career as music director in different orchestras, I have done a lot of programming. Sometimes it happens that circumstances just help you. Because as interesting as maybe all of that is, when finally the date happened that we are all thinking about, I thought, well, now it's even more interesting. So in other words, I don't actually need to say anything further. And we will see what impact it has. Our goal is actually to create a platform for further discussion of the topics, because we learned that in times like these, and in many countries in the world, actually talking to each other has become increasingly difficult when the theme at stake is tricky. And music, which is a language, actually helps each other, all of us, to embark on a situation that maybe then we can find some viable solutions. The other day I had this very interesting idea that the Senate, not only of the United States, the Senate always should start their sessions by 10 minutes of singing. You would be surprised. But after this powerful performance of Milagro Theater, I also wanted to take the opportunity, since the theme is, in this case, immigration, to tell you a little bit about myself. I think immigration can come in very different aspects. There is the immigration of you just want a certain job and the job is in a different country, off you go. There is the immigration that actually the economic situation in the country where either you were born or are living currently has become increasingly difficult and you think it's better to leave. And a lot of in-betweens, and finally there is also the immigration where you have to leave the country you were born into as fast as you can, because otherwise you are going to die. And that's where my personal story, through the story of my parents, started. We are all of Jewish background, and my parents are from Vienna, or were from Vienna in Austria, and the Nazis took over Austria to start with, and then the Reichskristallnacht happened. And you might now, since you probably read all the history books and you know about the horrors of World War II, you might not imagine that that was actually possible, but I tell you that back in the days, 36, 37, early 38, there were people in my family, my father's family, who actually thought, oh, never mind, these times are not great, but the Nazis will not do anything. They paid with their life. So Reichskristallnacht happened, and then everybody had to leave as fast as they could. My father left in one of the very famous Kindertransporter, one of the last ones, and went to Rotterdam and embarked for 1.5 years as a sailor or a Norwegian freighter without any idea of where to go, no concept. I always try to explain in regards to immigration in Second World War that there are 3 ways of immigration. You have relatives, meaning you go to the country where the relatives are. You have money, then you go Switzerland comes to mind. United States, you go wherever you want, or you just don't have anything, which is where my parents come from, and then you just leave. My father had no idea where to go. And the country and the city where he ended up spending the next 15 years after sailing the world, he would have probably had some trouble to even finding it, because he ended up in La Paz, in Bolivia. And there little sidekick, he met my mother there. My mother was 10 in 1938. My father was 20. And through Boy Scouts. And they fell in love, married, and decided that Bolivia is actually too dangerous to have children. Revolution every 1.5 years, people hanging from lampposts, not where you want to have children. Another emigration happened, because at that time, Uruguay, where my brother and I were born, was what was called the Switzerland of South America. Economically very stable, social things that we all would dream of. So they went to Montevideo, Uruguay. Brother was born, I was born. And then next immigration happened when my brother and I decided to study something that we couldn't study in Uruguay. And another immigration came because my parents decided they do not want to send their boys to Europe, because the chances of them of probably never seeing them again, aside from once a year on a long travel, are very, 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 very high. And so my father looked for work, age 55 at that time, 1973, and he was lucky because he found work, of all places, in Vienna. Yes, he did. And he lived the rest, with my mother and us, he lived the rest of his life in Vienna, and it was kind of a homecoming. And the last immigration that I can tell you is my own, because I was always interested in, actually, this is a work environment immigration. I had worked 16 years as a music director in different orchestras in Europe, and I always liked the way things work here in the United States, the professionalism and the quality of orchestra. So at a certain point, I simply decided it's time for me to come to the United States. And I was very, very, very lucky and fortunate to be accepted as music director of the Oregon Symphony, and I'm still here 15 years later. And and all of this is only to give you a picture of what immigration actually can do. And if you allow me one final thought, because of course with Catholic Charities we heard a little bit about what immigration can do and what it is. I come from a country, leave Uruguay aside, I lived 38 years in Vienna, in Austria. So as far as Austria, I lived in a country that has a very deeply rooted hatred, it's a very harsh way, for immigrants. And is unfortunately until this day, to some extent, highly anti-Semitic. Just wait 2 days, we have elections, and I tell you where this will go. Anyway, my point is, my perception of the United States was always, and I hope it always can be, come on, why do we ever want to discuss immigration as a problem, since all of you are immigrants? Anyway, I guess if we go around and everybody says, I am from, probably most of you are born here, but one generation, sometimes 2 generations back, somebody's Irish, or so let's keep that working, please. Now, we have 4 fantastic musicians of the Oregon Symphony, 4 ladies, who are going to perform for you. And these four wonderful ladies, Shin Young Kwon, Emily Cole, Jennifer Arnold, Marilyn de Oliveira, are a great example of diversity, immigration, and all, because, well, actually we have a true immigrant, we have a second-generation immigrant, etc. It's a great mixture. And they are going to play a piece that actually was written in the United States by, well, in this case, not an immigrant, but let's just say kind of. Antonin Dvorak came, well, he was invited to come to the United States to head up the New York Conservatory, which he did, worked tremendously, was very, very unhappy, and did something that we actually heard tonight about, which is he went where his own people are. So he went into a tiny community of 300 souls in Spillville in Iowa and spent, yes, go home and find it on the map, and spent a couple of, a summer there, and that is where the American String Quartet originated, and our musicians are going to play for you the second movement of that string quartet.
Ladies and gentlemen, Edna Vazquez.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Edna, and I will be telling you my journey through songs. I'm going to be telling you a little bit of who I am. I came to the U.S. when I was 17. I never expected to be and to live in this country just because I, never thought that just being myself was going to throw me into this journey that I don't quite understand. So I came here legally. I never understood the privilege of just having that option, And since I came here for being different, let's put it that way, because of my sexual orientation, I guess my biggest transition started me to do what I do nowadays, and every day I'm just discovering myself through music. So just, okay. So I remember the very first job that I had in this country. Made me think a lot of things, Where was I and why was I here and why was I doing something that I didn't like? I felt like in a river, and I felt like a salmon going against the current, which I express in this strumming. Life can be hard, but every day we wake up and it's a new day, We gotta deal with that. And more than anything else, it's beautiful to feel. ¿A dónde voy? ¿A dónde me llevas? ¿Por qué no me aflojas el nudo en la garganta? Ya ten compasión, no sigas, te lo ruego, deja de azotarme, déjame salir del pozo. Corriente, ¿a dónde me llevas? Mírame a los ojos tan rojos de la sangre que he llorado. Corriente, escucha mi llanto, porque no me aflojas el nudo que canto. Sigo tus pasos, durmiendo y viviendo, me mueves los hilos como una marioneta. Ya ten compasión, no sigas, te lo ruego, deja de fumarme para poder caminar. Corriente, ¿a dónde me llevas? Mírame a los ojos tan rojos de la sangre que he llorado. Corriente, escucha mi llanto, porque no me aflojas el nudo que canto. Thank you. I didn't know that being a Mexican was such a hard thing, especially in this country, you know? So I woke up every morning asking myself, why is it so bad to be a Mexican in this country? I never thought about it in my own country, you know? Even though we have our issues, don't think that we're a little different than you are, you know? We are human beings, so I started discovering that we are pretty much all the same, you know, and we have bigger issues to face as human beings. That is the oppression that we put on ourselves. So that made me think a lot of things, and I questioned about my government, my own government, you know, and which is not very different from yours as well. So I thought about freedom. So I made this song called Liberal, thinking about what is it to be free? And am I free? And, you know, I thought that that was a state of mind. And this song came up. And it's all a mixture of all these genres that I don't even understand. It's just this that is in my soul and that I release, you know. It just comes raw as it is. And I really think that that makes us all have something to share, you know, at some point in time and space for a reason, for a bigger reason that goes beyond even what I do.
Llegó la hora de zarpar. He decidido que hoy se marche el barco, que en otras ocasiones la miseria y el dolor fue parte. Llegó la hora de volar, de abrir las manos y soñar hacia un nuevo episodio. Solo basta imaginar y enterar. La rutina me invita a caer, a formar parte de un rebaño crucial. Y aunque la ignore no se va, ser parte de mí también a la vez.
And this strumming in my guitar resembles the wings of a dove. Dove just trying to be free, free of even herself.
Esta es la última enfermedad que el hombre se le ha puesto con su hermano. Suficiente con ropa de pan caliente, ya se le ofreció a él también. Llena ideas al hablar, pero no fluye ya el amor que un día nos uniera por igual, como los seres de un domingo bajo del sol que nunca existió bajo del sol. Ah, no.
Ladies and gentlemen, Edna Vazquez, one more time. Uno
Thank
más.
you.
Okay.
Una más, claro que sí. Yes, with pleasure. So, this last song, you'll all understand the lyrics because this last song talks about just being comfortable in our home that is our bodies. You know, if we're comfortable, if we're peaceful within ourselves, inside ourselves, then everything flows outside, you know, even if we're in the middle of a storm. I swear. So this would be my last song, and it was a pleasure to be here. If you have any questions, please do. You can ask me whatever you want. Yeah. Ooh, 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 ooh. Used to be alive, but it seems like we are walking dead. Oh, yeah. Try to figure it out, but each day is a new day. Oh, yeah. Here we are, walking by same trail. We are home. Oh, yeah. We are home. This is home. Welcome home. Oh, yeah. Yeah. We try to figure it out as we keep walking by. Oh, yeah. This harsh and heavy trail. If everything's a choice, we should know and rejoice. 'Cause we are home. This is home. Welcome home. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Thank you.
And thank you so much. That was fantastic. I think, well, how we all doing? We doing okay? I think we have some sore rears all around and maybe some neck sores over here, yeah? But I think we got just one more group for you this evening, and that's Portland Taiko. As we're going ahead and getting set up for Portland Taiko, I'm going to invite down their executive director, Win Kiyama, to talk to me just a little bit about what they're all about and what we're about to hear. Win, before we begin, I just have to say thank you so much for your deep partnership with the Oregon Symphony over the years. You performed at the Waterfront Festival. You played right at the top of the George Takei concert we just did. And I know several of my colleagues in the Oregon Symphony Administration enjoy taking drum lessons and hitting things after long hours. So thank you so much for your partnership. And let me hand this over to you.
Thank you, Steve. And thank you for this amazing program. I think this is a really fascinating and exciting site, but for our Oregon Symphony audience members, I imagine that these seats are not as soft as those you find in the Schnitz. So why don't we all stand up, do a little bit of stretching, kind of work it out. You know, as a taiko player, I'm used to attending to the body. It's a physical activity, and we have to take care of ourselves and each other, right? So stretch it out, get that back going. Feeling better? Okay, maybe now we can take a seat. I know it's been a long evening, and I wasn't planning on talking about myself at all, I promise. But after the stories that we heard tonight, I feel compelled to, simply for the fact that it's a reminder that immigration is not a talking point. Immigration is not an abstract theme, but it's people's stories. Right? It's our grandparents, it's our parents, who knows, maybe it'll be our children's stories, right? So all of these inform this idea of the Sounds of Home program. I will say that my story is much more pedestrian than the ones that we heard today. I am a Yonsei, which means a fourth generation Japanese American. My father's side is Japanese, my mother's side is Okinawan, so for those of you who know your Okinawan history, this means that I'm both the oppressor and the oppressed, which makes for interesting family gatherings. As an Asian American growing up in the 70s and 80s, I had two choices, and that was playing piano or playing violin. So I played piano. Eventually got a PhD in historical musicology, and that's what brought me to Portland in 2010, teaching at Portland State University, which I really enjoyed. After that, I got the opportunity to work with Portland Taiko, and for reasons that maybe I'll have time to explain, spoke to me in a different way than talking about Beethoven. Beethoven is fine. He doesn't need me to advocate for him. But maybe some other communities need some folks to advocate for. So I started working with Portland Taiko. Portland Taiko then similarly has the same perspective. It's reaching back towards Japan, but it has an Asian American sensibility. So Portland Taiko practices the Japanese tradition of group drumming, but through this lens of Asian American identity, creativity, and empowerment. So Taiko, this Japanese tradition, was brought to the United States in the late 1960s. So this is the time of the civil rights movement and then the burgeoning Asian American movement. So Portland Taiko was formed a little bit later in 1994, but fits into this continuum of creative expression, but coupled with a firm commitment to social justice. We collaborate with many different artists in the Portland area. So we've collaborated with Kalabarati School of Dance, the Obo Adi Legacy Project. Part of this is because drumming is one of those things, like art, like music, that transcends boundaries and allows people to communicate with one another easily. So collaboration is one of those aspects of our art form that we truly enjoy. When we perform ourselves, we do a mix of traditional works, so those that reach back to Japan, and contemporary works that we write here, so it speaks more towards an Asian American sensibility. And you'll hear different examples of this in the two pieces that we'll play, All Is Well and Amaterasu. Before I have the drummers start performing, and I know you're all waiting for the drummers to perform, I'm really curious to hear what the drums are going to sound like in this space. And I should note that Portland Taiko has 18 drummers, and we decided not to use all of our drummers tonight, which is good because I didn't know that the audience would start right here. So we're having a little bit of a toned-down performance tonight, and since we're partnering with the Oregon Symphony, we chose one piece, All Is Well, that features Keiko Araki, who is a violinist with our group. There's always been violins in our group, interestingly enough, since 1994, but she also performs for the Oregon Symphony. One final note, since we are talking about immigration, I noted that my own experience is pedestrian, but one aspect of the Japanese-American experience which might inform other immigrant stories is that of World War II. And so after the Japanese bombing of Pearl Harbor, a few months afterwards, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt signed Executive Order 9066, which opened the doors for the incarceration of Japanese Americans, 120,000, all of whom who ended up losing their property, their livelihoods, their jobs, their rights, and their humanity. So this, of course, was a different time. This was World War II, and we can well imagine the hysteria that was brought on by the bombing of Pearl Harbor. But one thing we should be aware of is that this goes further back to a whole slew of anti-Asian laws that were passed in the early 20th century, like the Chinese Exclusion Act or the Gentleman's Agreement. And so there's a context to all of this. It was fueled by wartime hysteria, but also by some deep-rooted racial prejudice, which is why maybe in the Japanese American community, we're kind of always watchful because of our stories from our grandparents or our parents of instances of violence and racism and prejudice, right? So whether these instances of violence, racism, or prejudice, whether when it happens around the corner, when it happens on the MAX train, or when we see instances of this kind of racism and prejudice coming from all levels of our government, we have to be watchful, right? We have to be careful, we have to take care of one another, and we have to stand up for what we believe in, right? Because the United States that I believe in is a different one, and I still believe that we can aspire to those levels, because right now we're not seeing the United States at its best, and we're certainly not seeing the United States at its greatest. These views may or may not be held by the Oregon Symphony, the supporters, their staff, the audience members, Wyden Kennedy, or any others, or any of the other members of our group. Having said that, thank you again for your participation in this important program. Portland Taiko.
All right, folks, how about one last final round of applause for all of our performers and Catholic Charities joining us tonight. Fantastic evening. I hope to see you at our first Sounds of Home concerts at the Schnitz in early November, and I also hope to see you at all of the performances that these fine artists and fine arts organizations contribute to our community. Thank you so much for being here. Good night.